Premier, thanks for joining me. I know that you recently got back from Dubai. Your government paid some expense to make that trip and set up a pavilion there. Why did you think it was necessary to have that sort of a setup and to have a presence like that at COP?
Yeah, there was an incremental expense for the pavilion that we did set up there to represent, I would say, not only Saskatchewan, but to advance Canada's interests and representing as Canadians at the COP28. And I would say it was well worth the investment, and it provided our industries and people that are employed in Saskatchewan industries, mining, in the agriculture industry, in the oil industry as well, the opportunity to not only talk about what we are producing and how we are providing over 150 countries around the world that opportunity to aspire to the food security and energy security goals that they do aspire to, but gave us the opportunity to talk about how we are actually producing it from an environmental perspective, specifically from a carbon intensity perspective. And it's something that we, in the whole conversation around climate change and sustainable production that we lose at times, is that we are producing in this province some of the, if not the most sustainable products of their kind on Earth. And we were able to provide that platform for Saskatchewan industries to talk specifically to that. And so it was well worth the investment. It's likely not an investment that we would have the opportunity to make each and every year at COP, but where that opportunity arose in a market of interest, where we might have a trade office to back up some of the effort that goes into that, we would consider it again, but it's not an every year thing.
When it comes to climate change, what are some of your concerns about the future? We have fires this year. We had hot temperatures. We have a brown Christmas potentially. This is something people are concerned about. Young people are concerned about. What are some of your concerns when you think about climate change and its effects on the province and also on the economy? Yeah,
my concerns actually revolve around unrealistic policy. There's a transition that is happening globally, and it's happening here in Saskatchewan as well. And I understand some of the initiatives that are being brought forward by, in our case, in the federal government in Canada. I understand what the end goal is. What bothers me, and I think what concerns me as a subnational leader, is the unrealistic regulations that are coming into place in the meantime, that are designed not to in any way lower emissions in certain industries, but are actually designed to push those industries out. And when you consider that some of those industries are the most sustainable in the world, that means that the world is going to be using a dirtier product into the future. And so we need to do better, and we are in Saskatchewan at how we are producing the products that we do from a sustainability perspective. But we also need to realize that we're already in a very advantageous position from a sustainable production perspective when we compare it to the world, and we should be doing what we can to displace some of those other products in other areas. And so I understand the end goal of where the federal government is heading. What concerns me is some of the steps that they are putting in place that are hurting Canadians.
What's the balance for Saskatchewan in telling that message, but also having initiatives and having projects that you can show federal government, other Canadians, and people in Saskatchewan, hey, we're committed to having a greener future?
Well, and I think what this did at the COP28 conference was, let's look at the oil industry, for example. We had a net zero oil company there. No one else had a net zero oil company, as there isn't one anywhere else on Earth. We had an oil company talking about how in the last 3 years they had reduced their methane emissions by 59%. Nowhere else in the world am I aware where there's been that type of a reduction in methane emissions by an oil company. And so credit to those companies that are making those investments. I would say the most impactful agreement that came out of COP28 was the 24 countries signing to triple their nuclear power footprint. That means we'll go from 400 nuclear reactors to 1,200 in the world. That means that Saskatchewan uranium, which is the second largest uranium producing area in the world, just became a lot more valuable. And our opportunities to expand that fuel production just became a lot greater. I would say that with Cameco purchasing Westinghouse, one of the largest nuclear companies in the world, that now we have actually the opportunities to participate in that supply chain up and down from the fuel, not only on the fuel providing side, but up and down in the in the entirety of the nuclear industry. And so there's going to be some great opportunities ahead for us as a province of Saskatchewan to participate in the industries that we traditionally do, but they're going to look a little different in the future when we look at them from not only providing that energy and food security to countries, but providing it as some of the most sustainable products that you can find on Earth.
Switching gears, in just a matter of months, the government's budget surplus projected over $1 billion, is now projecting a deficit of about $200 and some million dollars. Why was the forecast off, and is that a concern when you go into the future in budgeting that you could have such a wild swing like that?
Yeah, and it's not the first time we've seen that in Saskatchewan. And so as a province that does have some reliance on natural resource pricing around the world as we produce these products and we collect royalties off these products that do find their way around the world, we are susceptible to some degree to what happens in the natural resource pricing space, whether that be oil, agri-food products, potash, uranium, whatever that might be. Now we're diversifying those products and expanding them as we look to the future. But that's the first large variability that we have in our budget, and that may change a little bit as we find our way through the latter half of the year as well. The second is actually not a cash item. It is, but it's a funded item, and that is the drought we had in southwestern Saskatchewan, which was larger than what was the average that was anticipated in the budget, which was the same as the year previous as well. And we're hopeful that as we find our way through an El Nino weather pattern here, that we'll find some snow as we head towards spring. That is a fully funded program. That's not an actual cash cost to the government, and in no way is that a drain on the government resources. That's part of the summary financials and needs to be counted in that broader stroke. So I would say this: when we had a significant surplus at the outset of this year, and we'll see where the year ends, as there's still 6 months left. But last year, a significant surplus. This is where the temptation to bake that surplus into annual operating expenses has to be resisted in Saskatchewan if we're to be sustainable in our investments over time. And we've seen a finance minister that has, I think, been very adept at explaining that over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. There are going to be fluctuations as we find our way through these natural resources ebbs and flows through the years. We need to focus on making the investments that are sustainable over multiple years as opposed to looking at each individual year here in the province. And so we're going to see these ebbs and flows as we go, and we'll have discussions about what we can do if there's a number of strong years that line up. There's still talk of should we put that into a fund. What we've chosen to do to this point in time is to use those surpluses to actually pay off any of the debt that we have. Either way, whether you're collecting interest in a fund or lowering your debt to not paying as much interest, the impact is similar.
When it comes to, you mentioned not baking that in, but there's a lot of pressures, obviously, and you hear, every day in here when the sitting is in about spending more money on education. You've had to put money in during the year for that with increased enrollment. Healthcare is another thing that's a pressure for the government. A lot of this comes down to population and having newcomers in the province and people moving into the province, which is something you're pushing for. Where are the pressures in healthcare right now, and what are some of the priorities for you as far as tackling that? Because we've heard about issues with ambulance service. I know you've addressed that recently. In Saskatoon, there's issues with retaining healthcare workers like nurses and doctors. What's in store for next year as far as the government's plans to address some of these healthcare concerns?
Well, I'd say first and foremost is the government is focused on outcomes, and that's why you've seen in the short term some investments that are going to provide outcomes in a much shorter order than if we traditionally looked at doing things the way we should. I point towards some of the mammography and biopsy scans that we had purchased from a private vendor in Calgary. Some of the, what you'll see is some of the orthopedic surgeries happening in a private clinic, but publicly funded in the very near future, which will open up some capacity in our public operational theaters as well. So the first is we need to focus on what the outcomes are from the patient's perspective. The second is we need people, like every other province across Canada, and we're working very hard through our Health Human Resource Plan and very focused on that plan on adding people to the system, like every other province is. And we've hired over 800 new grads, 400 international grads added to that, nursing grads into our system, but it's still not enough, and we're still adding that human resource to our facilities across the province, and we need to have some more. And then the third thing I would say is we always need to be open across, up and down the system, from government right to the very front lines, to listening, collaborating, and innovating, and where there's opportunities to offer services in a little different way. We need to be open to that. And so, I would point to the changing discussion year by year around mental health and all too often subsequent addictions, and the investment that we're making starting in Saskatoon and Regina with our urgent care centers, primarily focused on relieving some of the pressures that we have in our emergency rooms in our largest centers. But there's the secondary, or I would say parallel intake that is in there, or in those facilities, that is about providing that catch-all intake for folks that may be having a mental health crisis or have unfortunately entered a life of addictions and are ready to make a change. To enter an emergency room and to be told that you can come back next Thursday for a detox bed. That just doesn't work. We need to take those people by the hand and get them in front of the medical health professional that they need. And so being somewhat innovative in how we are looking at the delivery of healthcare, I think is imperative as we look ahead. And nowhere better to start than as we build out capacity in that mental health and addictions recovery space.
Do you have the people to staff those centers and those mental health units?
We're getting there with respect to internally people in the Saskatchewan Health Authority, and then people also within some of the folks that are offering the services through private contracts, offering some of the recovery bed services. We see that happening in some of the operations in Estevan, for example, which is really our first foray into this more intensive recovery bed effort, not the traditional 28-day alcohol recovery program that we as Canadians and Saskatchewans have been used to having access to. This is a much more intensive recovery and mental health treatment aspect that is involved there. And so there are private operators that are doing some of this, and there's the public operation that is doing some of the detox capacity as well. And it leads into some of the efforts that we're making, and Minister Makowski had mentioned around some of the support in the homelessness space, in particular some of those in our communities that have the most complex needs. Unfortunately their next stop might be incarceration, and if you can provide that healthy alternative with some of the supports around them to start climbing up into maybe an assisted living space. Not all, but if some make it through, that's the supports that the government is trying to look at a little bit more holistically, and consulting with our municipal leaders, consulting with what's available in the private sector that we can contract to really wrap around some of these services to at least provide the opportunity for a better life for many that may have slipped into a life of addictions, for example.
I wanted to ask you, this fall, the government called the legislature back early. You invoked the notwithstanding clause over your parental rights policy. That policies received criticism, but also support. What sort of lessons do you take from that, and what have you heard from people, both for and against, since then? Yeah,
I would say keep listening. Still today, in particular on let's talk specific to that policy. As you know, we walked through that policy, and there's a lot of discussion, public and actually more private discussion as well from people across the province. But where the government's perspective was what we did was essentially bring a policy forward and standardize a policy across the school divisions and the schools in the province that was largely in place and was largely a status quo policy for years previous. We had a school division that changed, openly changed that policy. Many others had this status quo policy written in. And then we had what happened in Lumsden with those cards that became available to a classroom there, which I think really elevated the public discussion and elevated parents' awareness of the topic in general. Our MLAs talk to a great many of people, parents, teachers across the province. I understand and learned through the court process that there was 18 letters that were sent to the Ministry of Education, which I was not aware of at that point in time. So we would add that to the grand total, I suppose, of people that would have expressed an interest on this. And we came forward with the standardization of that policy across the school divisions, and we were very clear. We said if that policy ever found a day where it wasn't going to be in effect, we would use the tools that the government had to ensure that it would be in effect. And that's precisely what happened, and that's precisely what we did. Now to the listening, and the government did listen throughout the implementation of that policy and ultimately the passing of the law in the legislature. We need to continue listening, because at the end of the day, all of those involved in the conversation, including the government of Saskatchewan, who as individuals are parents as well, we all want to have the most constructive, positive learning environment, supportive learning environment for all the kids that are attending our schools, wherever that might be in the province. And so, as we continue to move forward on this topic or any others, we should never lose sight of, what the goal is here, and we all have a mutual goal. And we might disagree on a few things as to how we actually achieve it, but we should never lose sight of where we're heading.
Yeah, on that, recently the Children's Advocate came out and it suggested the government needs more oversight when it comes to independent schools. There's been a lot of questions raised about legacy. I know that the previous Minister of Education had said that if there were charges or convictions, that the government would look at extra measures. We've seen a conviction, we've seen more charges. The criticism has been that the government's not taken as much of a sort of direct response to that versus what you've done with the parental rights bill. What do you say to that as far as some of the things that have happened at that school and the charges and now a conviction there?
Yeah, unfortunately, these types of things happen in independent schools, our public schools, and our separate school system. And the individuals that are involved need to be held accountable, very much so. And I would say in the case of independent schools, there's a time frame here that does have some importance through it, because they haven't always been funded in any way by the government of Saskatchewan, and even today they receive a much smaller percentage of funding than our public or our separate school system. But as that funding arrives, in whatever level it does, there does need to be increased oversight from the Ministry of Education. And I would say as that funding has arrived, there has been an increasing oversight of the independent schools across the province, and that needs to continue. And so I think the conversation around more oversight from the Ministry of Education in the independent school or the qualified independent school sector isn't one that is by any means off the table. At the end of the day, what we are aiming to do, and I think all of us is for the most safe and productive learning environment for our children, but also preserving the opportunity for parents to have some choices to what type of a learning environment they're going to place their children in. And so that is what we're trying to provide, and the conversation around additional oversight, as there is not full funding relative to public and separate schools, but substantial funding that comes from the government now into that sector, which is new in the last decade or so. I think that's a fair conversation for us to be having.
What do you make of, I talked about some of the controversy around the parental rights bill, and we also had, pretty, noteworthy protest here at the legislature. There was some that spilled out into the hallways, and then a few days later with some allegations from your side and the opposition kind of trading shots. there's kind of been a few divisive, let's say, issues this year that have got a lot of attention. What do you make of that? Do you think that's healthy? Do you think that's something that needs to be reined in? What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, no, I don't think it's healthy. And what happened here in the legislature, we have protests all the time out front. And what happened here that actually shut down government operations for a period of time was a protest actually proceeded into the legislative chambers. There's questions around what involvement the opposition, some of the opposition MLAs may or may not have had in organizing that moving into the chambers and in an unprecedented way shutting down the operations of government. None of that is healthy. But I think it does speak to some of the uncertainty that we are seeing globally. We have still today a Russian invasion of Ukraine that is happening before our very eyes and moving the lines of democracy in Eastern Europe. We have a Canadian government that has very much I think lessened the degree of relationship that we have with the world's largest economy in India. We have what is happening with the terrorist invasion of Hamas into Israel, and this consequences that have arose in light of that initial invasion. And I think we see some of that, and we should understand that Saskatchewan is not only global in our economic touch, providing those products to so many countries around the world, but by having the population growth and the immigration that we have experienced over the last 10 to 15 years, we very much are global in our family connections as well. And so we need to be understanding, I think, of all of that, each of us. And at this point of the year, going into the Christmas season, I think it is incumbent for us as individuals, yes, as governments of various levels, but as individuals to really pay attention to what are we doing to bring blessings to others? What are we doing in providing that that positive comment to someone that maybe we just haven't got along with that well the last 3 or 4 months? And what are we doing in lending a little bit of time to our communities, to our friends, and to our family members when they most need it? Generosity and acceptance starts at home. It starts with individuals, and it spreads as quickly as divisiveness can. And maybe this is a time of year for each of us to remember that, including myself.
What makes you reflect on that? What makes you think that that's something that should be a focus going into next year?
It's the Saskatchewan and Canadian way. We are generous as individuals, and traditionally we have been very generous in our relationships and how we form relationships and how we foster relationships as Canadians, both within our nation and around the world. And challenging years, the last few years behind us, but we should always remember we are a part of a family. We are a part of a friend group. We're part of a community. We're part of a province, and we're part of a nation. And I think it's a great nation. And I think that all starts at home. It starts with me. It starts with you, Adam, and it starts with each of our listeners. And this, heading into this festive season, hopefully people have the opportunity to regroup and spend some time with those that are most important to them in their life, that we can just maybe reflect on that a little bit.
What's something you're looking forward to this break here, this Christmas break?
I'm looking forward to just getting home and seeing my wife day in, day out, and she'll be working right through Christmas, and so I have the opportunity to actually cook some suppers and things for her, my family, whom I miss dearly. They're busy doing their thing, grown children, but I love them so very much, and all of the friends that I don't see enough throughout the course of the year in the community that raised me, in the community that I still live. And so what I'm looking forward most to this Christmas is just getting back to being myself in the community that I call home, and taking with me just a little bit of those thoughts on how can I be just a little more generous today than maybe I was yesterday.
Thanks for your time, Premier.
And thank you very much, Adam.